I lost my father about 7 years ago this month, and that was a turning point for me. It was almost like freeing me from walking in his footsteps, to where I could look at his life and I could look at my life, and I could see how quickly I was following him. And so it opened my eyes, but even still, I think it was a couple of years. I became a recluse, living, kind of isolating myself from everybody, and it just wasn't healthy. It wasn't good, and it broke me spiritually. My mother had planted a seed a few years back. She had been trying to get me to come to church with her to a place called New Life Church. And going to this church, what I saw was it was multicultural, diverse, and the sermons really spoke to my heart. It spoke to me from a place that I felt like the pastor knew what I was going through. The songs that were sung spoke to me from the same place, and it was really uplifting. The church was so big that when I left, nobody was reaching out to me. I needed fellowship. I needed to be around these godly people, and for some of that to come off and rub off on me. But it was kind of like, after all that great time, the sermon and the music, everybody just hit the door running and went home. And so it kind of left me wanting. So I didn't stay. I didn't go too many times with my mother to that church. But then I moved away about an hour and a half. And that's when I, living on my own for the first time, not knowing anybody in a new community, I became isolated. And in my isolation, I drank more. And it was just it was a downward spiral. So I took a chance one weekend. I went in, and the church family, congregation was really small. I call them a family now, but they were really small, to the point that I got to know just about everybody there in that one time. So by next weekend, I had all these new names that I had to remember. And I think it was probably a few months before I even actually sat down and talked to the pastor. It was mostly people within the congregation were reaching out to me. Not that the pastor wouldn't, but I think when you're kind of easing your way in there, it's almost like approaching God when you're bogged down with all this sin. And so when you look at a pastor as the head of a church, as a leader, somebody that's got, that's a godly influence and operating in God, then it kind of makes it seem a little like he's unapproachable, but that was far from the truth. So the more and more I talked to him, the love and mercy that he shows, which are aspects from the Father in heaven, that drew me closer to Christ than preaching hellfire and damnation ever could have. There's a scripture that says, taste and see that he's good. Forget what other people have told you in your life. There's a ton of media, there's a ton of assumptions and opinions about who Christ is. Learn for yourself. But you got to look at the bigger picture, because that God is a God of the bigger picture. There's several things that if you really want to understand him, you've got to open your mind. You can't be closed-hearted, and you've got to be willing to receive these things and just let them flow into you. It takes time to discern God's ways and how they apply to your life and what God was really saying with this scripture or this scripture. He'll give as long as it flows within his will, and that's another thing you've got to understand too. And that's another thing that you struggle with as a Christian, is trying to understand God's will in your life. But he has a purpose and a plan for you, and it's good. And as long as you draw close to his heart, you can see this for yourself and trust him and believe.